Welcome everybody. My name is Daniel Medina. Welcome to a webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I've been here since 2006 and primarily handle the math and the planning here. We're going to start today by doing a quick walkthrough of our website. For those of you who've never been there before, the URL is www.ybpoor.com or westlakefinancialadvisors.com. The center of the screen is where we post everything that we go through: news articles, radio interviews, and blog posts. When you click on news articles, it'll take you to our investor intelligence page, where you can click through to all of our latest updates. So please make sure you check that on a weekly basis and see what we're doing. John, you're on.
Well, thanks, Daniel, and thanks for being the math man, so I don't have to try to be when I grow up. You can do just a fine job, and Jasmine will help us get everything lined up. And by the way, Daniel's been here for going on 14 years, which is quite a long time. Jasmine just started, but she was a former, she got to University of Midland on a wrestling scholarship. So we don't mess with Jasmine because she's all over everything that she needs to be on it. She does a great job. So let's just kind of regroup a little bit, because we like to talk about, in the news, you always hear about how the market did today, as though that tells you anything, because it's a one-day event. And we make, all kind of announcements and pronouncements and conclusions and assumptions based on a one-day event. We don't see the trend. So the trend has been that the market has been up, and it has since the lows of March 23rd. But to help keep things in perspective, I can say to you, as of today, the three indexes we watch are the NASDAQ, of course, the Dow, and the S&P. Only the NASDAQ is in positive territory, about 10% so far this year, from January 1 through today, 10.45. The S&P is off about 3.63% so far this year. And the Dow is off 8.48, so nearly 8.5% loss so far this year. So just to keep things in perspective, we run these numbers by Daniel to make sure that I run them to make sure I get them right. When the market's off 30%, as it has been this year, the math is real simple. You need a 50% gain to offset that 30% loss. It's almost counterintuitive, but that's the math. And let's go back to look at history, which we don't like to do. We don't like math, we don't like budgets, but if we look at history, we can see the evidence that in Depression 1, there was a period of time where the market had bounced up 50%, held it for like 6 months, but that was in the midst of an 80% decline. So there are a lot of global portfolio managers who believe we could very well be in a dead cat bounce or a bear market rally. I think that is possible. We'll pay attention to that as we go along. So that's a start, and then we're going to cover these items today, talking about some history. And then here's our 6 facts about economic inequality in the U.S., something a lot of people don't want to talk about, but it's real. So let's just look at it. And then that's the introduction. This is the things we'll discuss. And then we're delighted that a very good client, we're delighted to work with a whole bunch of very good clients, and Amber Masci is one of them. She's on with us, talking about something she discovered that we've been involved in, how we can create a better world, not tomorrow, but today. And right now, creating a better world, in my mind, would be a very, very good idea. So let's get down to brass tacks in terms of that income inequality. These are pictures of 2 houses. I believe they're in Naples, Florida. You ever been to parts of Florida? They look exactly like this. This is not a rendering, and it's astonishing to see what appears to be a teardown right next door to a mansion. It's just astonishing. But when we look a little further, we can see that over the past 50 years, and this all comes from Fact Tank as of February 7th, 2020, and then the charts come from the Pew Research Center. So over the past 50 years, the highest earning 20% of U.S. households have steadily brought in a larger share of the country's total income. So in 2018, households in the top fifth of earners, that's incomes of $130,000 or more, brought in about 52% of all U.S. income, more than the lower 4/5 combined, according to the Census Bureau data. And that's where we get a lot of our, ultimately, that's where a lot of the information comes from, the U.S. Census Bureau. So we think that's a very, very good source. So that was like in 1968, if you were old enough to remember then, the top earning 20% of households brought in 43% of the nation's income, while those in the lower four income quintiles accounted for 56%. So this kind of helps put things in perspective. Next, let's look at the G7 nations. And I'm surprised to see that we have the highest income inequality of the G7 nations. So the way they use this is something called the Gini, G-I-N-I coefficient, and it's a way to help offset what representative to the US dollar and trading in dollars. So you've got a lot of math going on here, but clearly the disparity is the best or the worst, depending on how you look at it, in the US, and we have some work to do here, no question about it. Now let's look at race, because this is something that, in fact, a friend of mine and I were just having a conversation. He says, why do we always have to talk about race? This is America. Everything's about race. Let's just be honest. So let's just call it as it is and take a look at it. Let's just not throw it under the bus or pretend like it doesn't exist. It exists. It's real. So let's notice that the income gap between white people and black people has persisted. And in fact, you can see that it's gotten worse. The difference was about, what, is that 34,000, 33,800 or so, 33,900 difference, I'm sorry, 23,800 difference in 1970. And now we get up to the $33,000 difference by 2018, and this is in 2018 dollars. So again, the disparity between races is increasing. That is not a good sign. And this is one of those things that I think helps people understand when you hear, whoever it might be, called this the best economy ever. For some, that would be true, and for others, not so much. All right. I mean, imagine trying to live in America in a household. These numbers are one or two people working. So imagine trying to live anywhere in America on $50,000 a year. That would be pretty tough. And yet we have clients where their net worth are $20 million, making $1 million a year, and those who are actually earning and successfully managing $40,000 a year. So it's all about making sure your budget works for you. And that's the thing that we've got to recognize. But when we say, this is the best economy ever, when I hear that, my interpretation is it's supposed to be the best economy ever for all Americans, not just the top 1%. So let's go a little bit further and look at the overall. 61% of Americans say there is too much economic inequality in the country today, but of course it differs by political party and household income. So here we go. With my Republican friends, they lean toward those who lean toward the party. 41% say there's too much inequality in the US. Democrats and those who lean Democratic see that number to be more like 78%. And this is from a study that the Pew Research Center did. So across income groups, we see that US adults are about equally likely to say there is too much economic inequality. But when we look at the top 20%, 27%, and include middle Americans, 26%, they would agree that they're more likely, they find that there's too much income inequality as compared to the lower incomes where it's only 17%, to say that there is about the right amount of economic inequality. So, do I have the right to say to you, you're being unfair, or you should be accepting and be okay with your income inequality? No, I think what we should be doing is having a conversation about a number of things, as opposed to throwing people under the bus or feeling a certain way, and I'm right, you're wrong, so let me just kill you because you have no real opinion. Now let's ask people what their opinions are and see what we can do to adjust these situations so that we all win, so that, rising tides lifts all boats. In this case, everybody's in the water, but some people, their boat's on the shore, on the sand, or it's barely in the water. I want everybody's boat to be in the water and to rise accordingly. And then let's look at the fifth slide, the wealth gap between the richest and the poor, where it has more than doubled just since 1989 to 2016, all right? So this is another way of measuring inequality, to look at household wealth. And we're going to be talking about this next week as well. Or net worth, household wealth, net worth, they're synonymous. It's the value of assets owned by a family, such as a home, savings account, minus any outstanding debt. such as a mortgage or a student loan. So that's where those numbers come from. In 1989, the richest 5% of families had 114 times as much wealth as families in the second quintile, one tier above the lowest, as you can see. At the median, 2.3 million compared with 20,300. By 2016, the top 5% held 248 times as much wealth as the median. That's huge. I mean, really, right? So that the median wealth of the poorest 20% is either zero or negative in most years that have been examined. So when we look at the Great Recession, we see from 2007 to 2016, the median net worth of the top 20% increased 13% to $1.2 million or above. For the top 5%, it increased by 4% to 4.8 million, nearly $5 million. In sharp contrast, the median net worth of families in the lower tiers of wealth decreased by at least 20%. Now that's a complete disconnect, right? Families in the second lowest fifth experienced a 39% loss, from 32,000 in 2007 to 19,500 in 2016. The best economy ever. We're all shaking our heads going, there's no way any person by themselves can get by on $20,000. Certainly no one with anybody other than one in the equation can get by on something like $20,000 on an annual basis. It's just impossible. And finally, let's look at the middle class incomes in terms of how they have been impacted. They have grown at a slower rate than the upper tier incomes just over the last 5 decades. So in short order, the number of middle class people is in decline. So this goes from 1970 to 2018, showing that the median middle class income increased from $58,100 to $86,600, a gain of 49%. But by comparison, the median income for upper tier households grew 64% over that time, from $126,100 to $207,400. Now, you know, if you're making 50, I think the average household income in the Thousand Oak Westlake Village area might be around $120,000, $150,000. And you know, the funny thing is that nobody thinks they're rich. Who thinks they're rich? Nobody. You're not rich. No one will raise their hand. We have clients where they have invested $5 million and their income is $200,000 a year, and they have a magnificent lifestyle, but they don't think they're rich. So, you know, it's easy to say you're rich, you're poor, but where I have problems is where we have some people who want to dictate to other people in terms of how they should feel or how they should not feel, as opposed to asking the question, what is sufficient for you? How can we make sure what you have coming in works for you and your family, both while you're working and, of course, well past retirement, from the standpoint of what is life going to be after your last paycheck. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on here. And we see that during the time, the share of adults in the upper income tier increased from 14% to 20%, and the share of the lower income tier increased from 25% to 29%. So again, the rich are getting richer and the poor are growing in numbers, but they're also getting poorer. That's not my idea of a winning combination. So there you have your update. We're happy to answer questions. And I think, Daniel, there's a location in the middle of your bar here on your screen where you can post questions to Daniel, and he'll ask of me or of Amber as it applies, or sometimes we'll both answer the question. So now let's talk about making the world a better place today. And to me, it's an appropriate way to enter that whole conversation, because I spent a lot of time as a Boy Scout trying to become an Eagle Scout, managed to pull that off. But just about every time we would roll up to a campground, no matter the condition that was left by the previous troop, the scoutmaster would have this little story about making the campground better than you found it. And for me, that was always a magnificent metaphor, because it didn't just apply exactly to the campfire, it did. And yet, of course, the larger picture is you've been blessed with birth, you have capabilities, you have a brain. Now, scouts, you need to figure things out so that when you leave wherever you left, you leave it better than you found it, no matter how you found it. It was common courtesy that the previous camp troop would leave water stored where necessary and fire in the fireplaces, so that, you know, if you got in late, you could get light, you could get warmth. That was the way it was supposed to be. That's kind of an unwritten rule. But some troops took that. They did opposite that. They would destroy things, and then we'd have to put it back together, and still leave it better than we found it. And we actually got a sense of satisfaction out of that. So let's look to see how we might get a little satisfaction out of making the world a better place than we found it. Amber Masci has over 19 years in the biotechnology industry. She's been working a lot in project management and subject matter expert roles in operations, research, and development. Amber serves as board secretary for the organization we're going to be sharing with you, the Greater Connection, and focuses on grant writing for the nonprofit. She co-authored the 2020 International Monetary Fund grant that the nonprofit received, entitled Microloans for Macro Change. Like that combination. Amber is committed to empowering the Greater Contributions borrowers to lift themselves out of poverty and create a better life for their families and communities. She greatly values the Greater Contribution that provides borrowers a hand up, not a handout, to help those borrowers and their families become agents of their own success. That's what part of what got my attention, along with the exchange in terms of the dollar power of the US dollar in other countries. So the story that speaks to Amber the most is that of a Greater Contribution borrower who used her business earnings that she'd never had before to purchase her son his first pair of shoes at age 10. So we looked at inequality here. Clearly there's some inequality all over the rest of the world by a large margin. Imagine not having a pair of shoes before age 10. So Amber continues to work for women. And by the way, it's for women only. So Amber will address why that is, gentlemen, so they may create satisfying, safe, and productive lives. Amber, take it from here, please.
Thank you so much, John. I'm so happy to be here to talk about the Greater Contribution. And thank you for your presentation too at the top of the hour. It's alarming to see the data and understand that inequality that is happening. And it's not just financial. I mean, there are all kinds of other inequalities as well. It's been a difficult year. We've had COVID, social distancing, loss of jobs. There's been financial uncertainty. And of course, the death of George Floyd, and unfortunately many others, that's really, all of this is really having the nation and the world take pause and really take inventory of what's important. So what I'm hoping to do today is give an introduction and overview to the Greater Contribution. And hopefully this is inspiring to everyone on today's webinar. And it's a very interesting business model and a great program. Let me start out by telling you how I got interested in the Greater Contribution. It was the 2018 Olympics, the Winter Olympics, and I love watching Olympics. But my husband was teaching at night at Moore Park College for many nights a week during that time, and all I did was watch Olympics night after night. And I thought, if I'm watching this much Olympics, I probably have a little too much time on my hands. So I started scrolling around on a website called Volunteer Match, volunteermatch.org, and I bumped into the Greater Contribution. Around this very same time, John and Investors Advantage sent me an email that announced they were donating on my behalf to celebrate my birthday to the Greater Contribution. So I did a little bit of research and I submitted a volunteer form online, and I got a call from Karen Wright, who is our president and co-founder, and we talked. So we talked and I was just asking the basic questions. What is the Greater Contribution? What do you stand for? What do you do? And really our mission is to help women lift themselves out of poverty. And these women are located in Northern Uganda. And the mission really is to help them help themselves and their families and their communities become more robust. And we do this through our microloan program. Our program is actually quite different and quite effective because not only do we give microloans, but we provide training. We provide business training and we provide literacy training, as well as peer mentoring support to our borrowers. These are women in very remote villages of Uganda. They don't have vehicles. They sleep in and live in huts that have thatched roofs that we'll show you some pictures of later. And they really are so poor. They just don't have. But what they do have is spirit, and what they do have is drive, and they want to create a better life for themselves. What we do is we put them through training. So our business training includes budgeting, inventory control, record keeping, business planning, and even writing a very simple business plan. We discovered in this particular area of Northern Uganda that there are very high rates of illiteracy. Both local languages and English are spoken there, but a lot of these women didn't even know how to write their own names or even read a street sign. So we developed a 2-year literacy program that took them through the basics. They know math, they know how to write their names, write a simple business plan. And importantly, these literacy classes are for 2 years. All of this training is required in order to get a loan or get a second loan from the Greater Contribution. And finally, the last part of our program is we have peer counselors who provide mentoring to our women borrowers. What that includes is a woman who has been through our program, been successful in her small business, and she comes to these loan groups where women guarantee one another's loans. So if one woman's crop fails or her chickens die and she can't pay back her loan, the other women guarantee pitch in and help her repay her loan. So these peer counselors come and they advise. They advise on business practices. They celebrate success. They help the group and the individual women troubleshoot and problem solve so that they can be better entrepreneurs and run their businesses better.
And talk about the loans themselves, please, Amber. And don't forget to talk about why the loans go to women, not the men.
Yes,
That's
I'll address that right now. So men spend income differently in Uganda than women do. Men tend to spend it on, let's just say, comforts of the flesh, drinking, other creature comforts, and the women actually put the money back into their families. They put the money into their children. School is not free in Uganda. They have to pay school fees. The children need to wear uniforms. They need to buy books. And these women are the ones who ensure the education of their children. The women also plan and look after the finances typically in the household. So the women have a greater sense of need and direction of where the money needs to go, and it needs to go and stay within the family and stay within the community. So I'll shift gears a little bit to talk about the loans. Since 2008, we have granted over 18,000 loans. And this is an amazing statistic to me. We have overall, in all of those years, a 98% repayment rate. And in 2019, we had a 99% repayment rate, which is phenomenal to repay back a loan. A typical loan is between $50 and $250. When a woman comes into Greater Contribution and applies for her first microloan, she gets $50. There are loan cycles throughout a 2-year program, that she can reapply for higher amounts of loans. And what do we use as criteria to give those higher amounts? We make sure that her business is on track and that she is earning income like is expected per her business plan. And we also look at her repayment rate.
And that's not in US dollars, that $50 is the entry, correct?
It is US dollars,
Okay.
$50 US dollars.
All right.
So
The buying power there?
is incredible. I don't know what the exact rates are, but in Uganda, it is so poor that a lot of those people rely on secondhand clothing and shoes. They really don't have as much buying power. So with this loan that may not seem like a lot of money to us is gold for them.
Well, that's one of the things that got my attention and one of the things that caused us to get involved, because I thought, you know, Larry Kudlow is famous for talking about the trickle-down theory, which doesn't work, okay? But I thought maybe a trickle-up theory might work, where we get to the, you know, one of the lowest common denominators and give them some genuine hope, not just a pat on the head, not a handout, you know, not free this, that, or the other. And these folks, these ladies, I mean, I've seen some of them, and I felt like I've gotten to know some of their stories. They feel empowered. I mean, they feel like they feel like Superman all of a sudden, or Popeye, where they've got muscles they didn't know they had before, and now they can buy things and sell them profitably, repay the loan, and expand their businesses. It's a beautiful way to operate.
It absolutely is. What do they do with the loan money? We think, well, if we got a loan, we might increase our capital, or maybe we'll buy a new car. Here's what these women do. They provide perhaps more than one meal a day to their family, or maybe they can afford medicine or a visit to the doctor, one visit or a couple of visits. They can afford to buy a mosquito net to go over their beds in their sleeping quarters so that the frequency of mosquito bites can be less, and hopefully they won't contract malaria. There are some very, very human fundamental basics that these women are doing with their loans. Some of them have savings for the first time in their lives. The women enter the program earning about 37 US dollars a month, and they leave 24 months later earning over $150 a month. So
Wow.
that is quite a difference. Very,
See those
very
two numbers again?
marked.
37 to over 150?
Yeah, do the math, John or Daniel, do the math.
Just under 5 times increase.
5 times. There you go. Just as you asked for. Thank you, Daniel.
Amazing.
That's
Thank you.
a big increase.
It is. And I know Daniel is our numbers guy, so thank you, Daniel. We have provided microloans for over 5,500 women. And because of the family size there, it tends to be rather large. That means we have impacted over these handful of years over 33,000 people with our loan program. Those are the people who have benefited. I wanted to shift gears for a few minutes and talk about COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected everybody in the world, and our women borrowers in Uganda are no different. Most of the women provide goods to be sold in the marketplace. They provide grains, they dry fish, they provide livestock. Sometimes they sell secondhand clothes and shoes, but the key is access to the marketplace. Uganda completely shut down the marketplace. If we were feeling sad that we couldn't go to Macy's, they were really, really hindered because they had nowhere to sell their goods. A lot of their goods are perishable, and although their families and communities could consume some of these goods, they did have spoilage. Now they had no inventory to sell, even if they could sell the inventory. Transportation is also an issue. We're fortunate we could still get in our car and go to the grocery store. These women rely on a mode of transportation called boda-bodas. What those are bicycle or motorcycle taxis. So they hop on the back A driver takes them to the marketplace with their goods. The bodabodas were restricted. They were not allowed to be on the road. And even trucks or cars or vans could not be on the road unless there was a government permit issued. So even if they could get to market, they couldn't get to market. The Greater Contribution a couple of months ago put out an emergency appeal to our donors. And with those emergency funds that we raised literally overnight, we delivered over 6 tons of food and emergency sanitizing supplies to over 800 current borrowers in the program in the remote villages that we serve. Additionally, the peer counselors that I talked about earlier were educated by healthcare professionals on the transmission of the virus, how to avoid transmission, and that information was passed over to the loan groups that they serve. Hand sanitizer, most of the families were priced out of the hand sanitizer range. We at the Greater Contribution and some partner organizations drove up to 5 hours to buy the raw materials to make sanitizing solution that we distributed to our borrowers, as well as buckets for sanitizing. So right now, the Greater Contribution is really focused on bringing these women back to a pre-pandemic level of food security and getting their livelihoods back. I thought it would be a nice thing to show you a little bit about what I'm talking about in pictures. So Daniel, if you could bring up the slides, that would be great. All right, we can go ahead and go to the first slide, please. So I wanted to show you a picture of what the housing situation looks like there. It is very basic. We have mud huts, we have thatched roofs. You see a little girl in the doorway of her dwelling. And in the lower left, you see a picture of goats. Those goats are sheltering themselves from the rain under one of the thatched roofs. In the upper left, you see some blue plastic chairs. Those are chairs. I've been looking for patio furniture on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. Those are chairs that people can't even give away here in our local area. But in Uganda, those are considered a precious commodity. Most people don't have furniture like that. Next slide, please. These two photographs are some wonderful photos of our training that we provide. On the left-hand side, you see one of the instructors, and she's actually giving a business training class. And in this particular slide, she's teaching about creating a business plan and creating financial goals, which all of us do when we work with Daniel and John. On the right-hand side, you see women carrying a banner. This is our first graduating class of our literacy class. Our first literacy class was started in 2016, and these are the 2018 graduates. You see that their sign says, "We celebrate our mothers who have attained educations in adult literacy learning." So it's not quite perfect English, but they have learned so much and they have come so far with the program that we provide to them. Next slide, please. All right, so on this slide, you see groups of women. These are women in their learning circles, in their loan groups, and this is loan disbursement day. You'll notice that they're sitting on fabric, blankets, or the ground. There are many, many women in these loan groups, and they have notebooks, they have supplies so that they can write and do some figuring, take notes. And in the lower left-hand corner, you can see commodity, which is cash. And that is what helps make these women's world go round. They get these loans, they buy the capital that they need, and they move forward as entrepreneurs. Next slide. These are some pictures of some of our beautiful borrowers. On the top left, you see Eunice, and Eunice is what is called in Uganda a tailor. We here in the States would call her a seamstress. She has bought the sewing machine to make clothing and other artifacts for the community and sells those. We have another borrower who used her capital to purchase a sewing machine, and she was able to hire other women from the village she lives in to get a contract and sew school uniforms. So that serves a need for the community, and she has got the ways to do that and the staff to do it as well. On the upper right, we have Judith. She sells grains in the marketplace. On the lower right, we have Cecilia, and she is an embroiderer. And finally, we come to Deborah, and you see her big smile. She's got chickens that she can harvest the eggs from or sell in the marketplace. So these are just some of the things that our women do with their microloans. Next slide, please. We have a presence. Of course, we have a website, greatercontribution.org. There you can sign up for our website. You can see all of the projects and latest things that we're up to. You can sign up for our newsletter. We are on social media as well, the 4 big socials you can see there. And in case, we're not done with the presentation yet, but in case you wanted to email me, you can always reach me at amber.masci@greatercontribution.org. So if we can switch back, I'll just talk about some final thoughts about how we can create a better world today. It starts with you, and it's up to you. What I always like to say is take care of your own house first. That means your needs, that means your family's needs, your community's needs. But then I always challenge people, and I challenge you to look outwards, look outside yourself. And everyone has things that they're interested in, perhaps their passions, perhaps their interests. They could be people interests, animals, the environment. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is 2 things. 1, consider volunteering. You can go on volunteermatch.org to start and just look around, see what there are opportunities there are locally, see the opportunities nationally or internationally, and see if any of them speak to you. If you would like to make financial contributions to charities, a really good resource to research and use to do research on charities to see how financially robust they are and how socially conscious they are is to visit guidestar.org, guidestar.org. That is a really good way. Right now on the homepage for GuideStar, they have a lot of resources about charities that contribute to social justice and work towards fighting inequality here in the States. Another thing I'd like to invite you to do, if you'd like to find out more information about the Greater Contribution, aside from going to our website, greatercontribution.org, is to watch the 5-minute video there. And it's called A Whole Bright Future for Someone. And that will really bring to light our borrowers. You can see the hope in their faces. You can see the increase in joy, in respect that they have for themselves when you view that video, and to see how far the dollar goes there to make them create a better life for themselves. All of us on this webinar like money, or else we would not be involved in Investors Advantage. You can make a donation yourself, of course, to the Greater Contribution. And I'd like to put this out there. Our microloans start at $50, but in order to create the whole package as kind of a start, a gift of $80 produces 3 weeks of business skills training, capital to start a business or enhance a small business, that's the microloan, and the literacy training and the mentoring. So it's really a fantastic investment.
And that's deductible tax-wise?
Yes, it absolutely is tax deductible. So we like that come tax time. The last point I'd like to make is John mentioned the International Monetary Fund grant. We were able to secure a $10,000 grant in April, which was such a delightful surprise.
Absolutely.
I co-wrote that grant with one of our former board members, Elaine Himmelfarb, and it was such an amazing journey to be able to write that grant. Even though we successfully procured a grant, we cannot count on grant funds. What we can count on are individual donations, and those are the donations that make our program go. So one way that you can help consider making a better world today for some women in Uganda is through donating to the Greater Contribution. So that's my presentation today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, and let me say, you know, you never know how things are going to turn out. You never know how you go full circle. But if you're trying to leave the campground better and you do good work, I mean, I don't know how many folks have received the gift in their name or the contribution in their name, and that's as far as it goes. And some people dig a little deeper, which is what we were hopeful would happen, where people go, wow, this is really kind of cool. I like flowers. I certainly would accept a bottle of whatever, but you know, this goes a lot farther than that. And you know, that you're making these people really smile. And how many times do we give gifts to people and then you wonder, was it the right gift? Did they really like it? You don't know. So here I can share with you that they like what they're getting and they like how they're feeling. Well, how's it go? Don't give them fish, teach them how to fish, something like that. That's what's happening here. They're learning how to fish and they're learning how to take care of their families and expand, which to me is really what it's all about. So let's see, we have some questions. Great job.
Yes, and just two quick thoughts. One is if you do choose to donate, your company may give a match, and that potentially doubles your doubles the investment, really, and it's very, very powerful. Another little story I would like to say is my mother-in-law, she's going to be 89 next week, and I asked her, Mom, what do you want for your birthday? I always get her something, and she said, this time I want you to give a donation in my name to your ladies in Uganda. Wow. It was very sweet, and it's a very thoughtful gift as well. So that's another thing for all the listeners and viewers to consider.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Amber. We do have some questions coming in. First one is, how many women have been helped by the Greater Contribution?
Over 5,500 women have been helped, and then the family size is fairly large. I think it's about 6 people per family that they're supporting. Wow. So that really impacts about 33,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. How much do people live on there a day these days on average?
Well, they go into the program making about $37 a month. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying, what is it? The cost, or what the amount that people typically, do you know what they typically have? I mean, I think it used to be like less than $2 a day.
Yeah, typically that is what we have in our materials that explain more about the program, is less than $2 a day. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what the figure is for our borrowers, but it is pretty dismal.
Yeah. True.
And we'll be including in our follow-up email after this all the links for the social media, along with the website for the Greater Contribution for anyone that wants to connect with them. Next question, Amber, how many people on staff, either volunteers or paid, does Greater Contribution have?
Great question. We have 4 paid staff, and we have hundreds of volunteers that work special events for us, that send out invitations and announcements for us. We have about 7 or 8 board members, and all of the board are not paid. We are all working board members. So my job is board secretary as well as grants, grant writing. We have 2 women in Uganda who, one of them is our program coordinator, and she has an assistant. So what they do is they do meticulous record keeping. They disperse the loans. They collect the loans. They baseline surveys to measure how many meals a day are being eaten, how many children are enrolled and go to school, how many mosquito nets there are in the house. they really take a good look at that, and after every loan cycle to see what improvements are. And I can tell you the improvements are not just tangible, they're intangible as well. They really, they get inspired, these women, from their power that they're getting through their own work. We have had multiple women run for public office and win just because they have gained confidence and wisdom working through our program. And then the last part is we have two part-time staff that work here stateside. They're both located in Thousand Oaks, which is where our headquarters is. And they focus on our program development. And one of them is our wonderful administrative assistant.
So, wow. Next question, how does the peer support work?
Peer support is done through the peer counselors who have been through our program. So what we do is we see women who have leadership qualities, who have been through our program, who have taken microloans, who have gone through literacy, who have gone through business training, and we provide them with some leadership training, and we provide them with a bicycle so that they can get through the town and visit the different women and also visit the loan groups. So the loan groups on loan repayment day is when they will go into the community and also be available to the community at other times. So if a woman has a problem with her finances or her inventory, she can talk to this woman, but also they build trust with these women and they're able to advise where to go for resources. Domestic violence is a big problem in Uganda amongst our borrowers. And there are also access to justice problems, land, rape. There are a lot of problems there. So we partner with another organization who allows us to access what's called the Access to Justice program. Women can go there and get advice on how to deal with all these issues and even counseling from different people who are trained in that. So our peer counselors really are facilitators, teachers, guides, and partners to these women.
Wow, that's amazing. Next question, how much of the money raised goes to the greater contribution as a percentage?
I should have been more prepared with that, but I'm not. I believe it's in the 90s percentile. We do have some overhead and we do have some paid staff. What you can do is go to greatercontribution.org. Under the impact tab, we have our annual reports. We have a beautiful annual report that talks about how inspired these women are and what we have done to help these women over the last year. We help girls and women have access to sanitary supplies because, believe it or not, some of the girls, when they get their periods, won't go back to school, they'll drop out.
Oh, wow.
Access to justice program, running for office. These are real human needs and human, beautiful human experiences that we help facilitate. So I see John probably looking on his computer. He's probably trying to find that answer right now. Thank you, John.
Sure. I used to know it, so I mean, I am trying to find it because it has been a while since I've gone to look for it. But it wasn't absolutely. In fact, it was in the high 90s, as I recall. I could be wrong, but the president's salary is $0. Salary paid only to 3 individuals, and those are primarily the 2 overseas programs in Uganda full-time and 1 overseas administration and logistics in the U.S. part-time.
Right.
And income 123,000, expenses 59,000, 47,000 to programs. This is as of 2019. I don't see the specific number, but
we can look through it later, John.
It's better than most. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
Nobody's getting rich here, okay?
No, we have a good rating on GuideStar, and it's a pretty solid charity, or else I would not be involved. That is
well,
sure.
and neither would we be involved. So that's one of the reasons we were comfortable with this. It was different, but as I said, I thought it was impactful from the bottom up. And the other thing that really blows my mind is that exchange rate, how powerful the US dollar is. And just to put it in perspective, we don't recognize the power of the US dollar, but everything is traded in US dollars. And that's one of the reasons why your gas prices, while we complain about them, go look at the same prices when you go to Europe. okay? Any place else not trading in US dollars, it's much more expensive to buy gas than it is in the US of A.
Excellent. John, this next question is for you. How do we start to close the income gap?
Oh, wow. There's, so many of these. Everybody likes, part of what we're saying in terms of the market is everybody's looking for green shoots of good news. So we all like easy answers that might be a half a sentence long. What I'm trying to say is it's a lot of issues, but we won't be able to address them until we acknowledge where we are. And when we just placate each other with, this is the best economy ever, I'm having a really wonderful conversation with a neighbor of mine. She said, well, isn't that true? And I go, I don't know, is it? We just take what somebody says, particularly when they're in a very powerful position, and we just want to believe them carte blanche. I love what Reagan said, Ronald Reagan, right, to Gorbachev, trust but verify. Okay, if that sounds plausible to you, look under the hood. Is there an engine there? Is it electric? Is it a 4-cylinder? Or did somebody tell you it was a 12-cylinder engine and you should buy it because it's one of the last 12-cylinder engines available? So let's do our homework. Let's have the conversation. A lot of it is education. Notice, for example, that Andrew Yang, former Democratic candidate for president, what did he wear in his lapel? Math. By the way, when we look at, I looked a while ago at the disparity between income, the population that earns the highest income happen to be Asians. By the way, they also happen to be the fastest growing ethnic group in the US of A. Latinos are second. I thought it would have been the reverse. And so one of the interviews I was on, the TV interview I was on, asked, well, why do you think it is that Asians are at the top of the heap in terms of average household income? I said, well, I don't know, but I suspect all of us should have spent a little bit more time in math, right? And biology, right? And budgeting. Maybe that would have helped. Math is a 4-letter word that we can use and we have to understand it, but most of us don't want to take a moment trying to understand any math whatsoever. So we've got to get the education levels up, but we also got to get the people in this country need to feel like these people in Uganda with the greater contribution, where they have hope. I mean, imagine, what were we looking at? $30,000, $50,000 annual income on the low end for some groups. Have they experienced a 5 times increase? Okay, now that's the best economy ever. But don't just buy the sign. Let's look to see if there's any meat on that bone.
Excellent. Thank you, John. We're going to start wrapping up in the interest of time. So let's see what we got going on next week.
Yes. Please join us next week, because we're going to pick up where we left off here. And we're actually going to have what I'm calling the courage of conversation. Great timing. Let's talk about these things we have been too busy to discuss or see. And maybe this COVID situation was nature's way of saying, y'all are getting way ahead of yourselves. It's all about greed. It's all about money. And if you're not a 1%er, you're not, deserving to live. So let's get down and talk about racism. Let's talk about what's going on in our police departments. Just to tease you a little bit, we happen to know with Derek Chauvin that there were, 18 complaints about him at the Minneapolis Police Department. Are you living in a community where you can see the complaints of the officers in your police department? So we'll have a Los Angeles County Sheriff who is an old friend of mine. And sometimes, we'll be talking and I'll look at him and I go, the only reason we're friends is because you're retired. And we have a good laugh, because there's this thing with policemen. It's all about blue blood. In other words, they don't trust anybody other than themselves. And so we'll be talking about that from his perspective and some of the things that he has witnessed as a policeman that he can discuss now that he's retired, that was maybe a little more difficult to bring to the forefront when you're in the middle of things. And then we're going to be working with a new friend of mine out of Texas, who has been working on civic community activists and, what am I looking for? The civic rights issues. Yeah, that's it. Over the last 50 years. She's equally adept at talking to devout Donald Trump supporters as she is to the Ku Klux Klan members. as she is to her own family, talking about white privilege. That's one of those things that when you're white, you don't see the forest for the trees. You don't recognize that you take for granted some of the advantages you have, kind of like the gas advantage we take for granted. So she talks about that in a way that people get it. And by the way, she has some interesting observations about in the last 2 weeks, how it is that Houston fared the events, riots, pilfering, plundering, right? Then fared better, Houston did better than Dallas. And she has some thoughts about that. And she asserts that there have been some ways that Houston worked around that issue with their people that Dallas did not. So there was more devastation in Dallas, she says, as compared to Houston. So I'm delighted that they will comprise our panel. And I'll, of course, bring you up to date with some of the data that on Fox News, the host, Steve Hilton, along with Kellyanne McEnany and Stephen Moore, really did not want me to go into. They just wanted me to jump on the bandwagon and say this is the best economy ever. And I'm like, wait a minute, if you're making $1 million and your increase is 4%, that works, 40 grand. If you're earning 40,000, 20,000, 30,000, 4% increase, well, $50 a month, give me a break, come on. Let's look at this in a realistic way as opposed to with your beautiful rose-colored glasses and you're drinking all of the Kool-Aid. Let's just not do that because you don't get it right. And then we'll be talking about more work for those who have asset mark accounts. That's where we are advocates of active management as opposed to passive investing. And we're going to be explaining the work that they do so that as some of our clients have said, was this real? Did they really do something? Was it luck or was it pixie dust? So we'll be explaining exactly what has gone. And just to whet your appetite with that, for example, imagine, 2019 was a good year. And as people were celebrating, as they were on national TV about how great 2020 was going to be, one of the companies we do business with was invested 100% in stocks the 1st of November 2019. By the end of the month, November 2019, they were 100% in cash. So that's the kind of work we like to see happen on behalf of our clients while we're all too busy to keep the assets safe. So we'll be talking about that on the 1st. And yes, if you weren't prepared for the last 2 months or so, you're probably not prepared for the next 20 years. So we'll be sending you the ability to make sure you can sign on for next week. And then we'll be including a little video. If you haven't seen it, it's about 2 minutes long to help you see your perspective in terms of loss. And then there's a second part to that we ask you to complete. And call us if you're having trouble with it, but it's walking you through you determining how much loss you find acceptable. It's a different way of looking at the whole equation. We think it's superior to just about everything else we see. We pay for it, we use it. We want more people to get comfortable with it. And we're happy to help you get comfortable with it to see how it makes sense to you. Because what we want you to, if you're, last time we talked about a couple that's mid-30s and their goal was $2.6 million. So if you're at that level at 70, you want to stay at that level. Now, that means you do not want to wake up and find 2.6 drop to $1.3 million. And you still need an income of 4% on 2.6 million, which is $100,000 a year. That's not a combination you want to try and weather. You may not. So our whole objective is, what can we do to limit the losses so that you can stay in the game, so that you can watch the TV and watch the market do whatever the heck it does, but you know that your portfolio is performing within your specific parameters, maybe help you to the extent that it does. It gives you the cold, hard comfort that, well, the market might be going to wherever the Titanic is, but my money's not going there. So we'll be talking about that just before Independence Day, which is a great tie-in to financial independence and, of course, the independence of our terrific country where we have a lot of work to do. So join us next week. And is that it, Daniel? Did I cover everything?
That's it. Great job.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks again, Amber. Here's to your good health, both physically and mentally, and your good wealth. See you next week.
Thank you.